Welcome to Behind the Muscle Podcast. Today's guest is an IFBB Pro and prep coach. Today's guest is Andrew Berry. Andrew, welcome back to the podcast, man.
Hey, man, thanks for having me again. I enjoy listening to all the episodes and, catching some of the stories from some of the guys that I know online and maybe just don't know that personally and just hearing some anecdotes and stories about their preps or about their lifestyles. It's cool. I think that's the cool thing about social media when it's used the right way, right?
For sure. Yeah, man. Just for all of you that are listening today, watching this episode with Andrew, this is Andrew's second time on Behind the Muscle Podcast. So we are just going to kind of hit on some hot topics and dig into some relevant topics today. If you want to hear kind of Andrew's bodybuilding story, you have to go back probably about a year ago now. And one of the earlier episodes Andrew was on, and we got into kind of the normal, typical BTM podcast episode with him. But so Andrew, I've got just a more lighthearted, fun question for you, just to kind of kick off today's conversation. Then we'll kind of get a little bit more in depth with some topics. But so we've had two major pro qualifiers up to this point. We've had USAs, we have North Americans. Out of those two pro qualifiers, did any of the physiques, whether it was the guys that won the overall, Stuart or Felix, or maybe some of the other guys that got pro cards, or maybe some of the guys that just maybe were in first call-outs, were there any guys that really stood out in open men's bodybuilding to you from those two pro qualifiers earlier this year?
Yeah, honestly, both of them. Let's start with Stuart, right? And I actually got to meet Stuart like 3 days later when he did the Tampa. I sat down, we were watching the 212, and I sat down, I look over, I'm like, hey, what's up, Mr. USA? And I think he was still kind of shocked that people like recognized him, and thought that he was a big deal. If you follow his Instagram, he's got a very funny sense of humor. So we just kind of hammed it up a little bit, just shot some shit. But in terms of his physique, I think he's going to make an impact very soon. His growth over the last 2 years has been awesome. I think like as his body matures and has like, some of that grainy detail, that kind of stuff, as that starts to come on more and more, I think he's going to be a major factor. He's got great shape. He's kept his waist nice and small. I would like to see him a little bit tighter on stage, like that professional level conditioning that, some people are known for. I think once him and his coach can master that, it's going to be hard to keep that muscle out of a first call out. So, yeah. And then looking at Felix, it's funny because I was at Junior USA's sitting with Austin Stout, and he's showing me pictures of him. Austin's his coach, right? And he's like, well, what do you think? He's like, I think this guy could win an overall at one of the major shows. And I'm like, oh, no doubt in my mind. Like, he absolutely can. The problem with taller guys is that we end up looking kind of lanky. He didn't appear to have that at all. He's got musculature that is, not saying he's maxed out his physique, but it didn't look like he had major weaknesses anywhere. And the big thing for him was that his abdominal control was out of this world, something you just don't see on a super heavyweight stage very often. So I think, and the other thing about him is that you could tell he hasn't maxed out his growth. Like, he's probably got another 20 pounds he could put on him, and who knows, he could definitely be a factor. But I think between the two of them, I feel like Stewart's going to make a faster impact, whereas maybe Felix down the road is going to be, kind of tooting his horn, 2 to 3 years down the line.
Yeah. Were there any other guys that kind of stood out from either of those shows that obviously didn't win the overall?
Conditioning on Cole. His last name Eastfold, I think. Hopefully I don't botch that.
No, you're right. You're right.
His conditioning at both USAs and North Americans, without really, because, again, being a taller guy, usually when you really push that conditioning, you end up kind of looking a little stringy. I don't think he looked stringy. Did he bring the same musculature on his frame that the other guys did in his classes? No, but you can see the writings on the wall that, him and Matt Jansen have figured out how to keep that conditioning while keeping him full for his height. And I think with just a little bit more muscle, man, like he's knocking right on that door. So I was definitely impressed with that. Trying to think some of the other guys.
What about Austin Connolly, another Camp Jansen athlete?
Yep. Austin looked awesome. I think we all knew it was in the works for Austin at some point over the, whether he was working with AJ, working with Matt, somewhere down the line, it was just once he had the tissue, it was gonna be his card eventually. So that was cool to see. He's a good guy. Really happy whenever I see him, in the gyms or whatever. I'm trying to think of who else. It's funny, like even though it was only like 3 weeks ago and like 6 weeks ago, you're like, I can't even remember who was in those classes.
Yeah.
Who won the heavies at North Americans?
Was it Dom?
Dom, it was really cool to see him win because I wasn't there in person this year, but I was there the year prior. And I'm not saying he got screwed or anything, but when I left prejudging from North Americans, I was like, man, this kid's winning the overall. And then you come back in the night show and you're like, oh, that's kind of weird. What happened there? But yeah, so, congrats to him. Absolutely. I know he's been working hard at it for a couple of years. So.
Yeah. And with Dom, I mean, I think he's only like, he's a shorter dude, 5'5", 5'6", but when you look at his physique, like he's got muscle, man. Like he's just got dense, thick muscle. Like I was just, I follow him very closely on Instagram just for the simple fact he's a great dude. Been on here, I think 3 times or something like that. But like, I mean, his back, he's just got that, his erectors, he's just got that thick, dense muscle that a lot of guys struggle with getting that density with their back, right?
Well, and the density like continues all the way down to his calves, like his glutes, his hamstrings, like his adductors. He's just got that hard, dense muscle that runs right down the line. Kind of reminds me a little bit of Jordan Janowitz, who had a crazy year this year in the 212s. I was blown away with how good he looked, and it's been really fun watching him over the last 4, 5, 6 years as well. But yeah, he kind of reminds me a little bit of Janowitz with that harder, grainy, dense muscle. Maybe not the most beautiful structure you can see on a bodybuilding stage, but just getting the work done, Yeah.
Now, I want to, you brought up Cole's conditioning, and this is something that I want to ask you, Andrew, because we obviously see, both on the IFBB stage and the NPC stage, you'll see guys that, what kind of the experts will say, they have all the tools to be a great pro, to win the Olympia, to get their pro card, wherever they're kind of at, right? But it's usually the conditioning that's holding them back. So you're a IFBB pro, you're a top level coach. So this is a question that I kind of have from your perspective. In terms of conditioning, do you feel like with some people, conditioning is maybe more of a genetic thing where they can just get into that freaky peeled conditioning, and other people just can't, no matter how much cardio do, how few calories they intake? Like, do you think there is an element with that extreme conditioning that is hereditary or genetic, or is that a no-go?
So I'm going to go a couple different ways with this. First, to answer the question, absolutely, because just because I've seen it with people that I know 1000% are not cheating on their diets. I've known, with these people where, well, to me, when you come to like a sticking point in a diet, there's 2 ways you go. You either got to push harder or you got to pull back. And when you've tried those things several times with the same person with slightly different tweaks, and the result keeps on ending up the same, in my mind, it has to be a genetic thing. Okay. And I'll say this because, and I got to give AJ Sims props when he figured out, what's his name, who just won 2 shows.
I know who. Yeah, he was working with Chris Aceto.
He's working with
Hassan Mustafa.
Hassan Mustafa. He brought him in 2 shows, bone dried, peeled, shredded, every adjective you want to use. After every coach had brought him in looking good and full, but had never gotten that extra grainy detail out. So I feel like in some cases, it's like you really got to look at the genetics of someone. You really got to like take a really big magnifying glass or step back and do every ounce of research you can for that type of body type and figure it out. And AJ did, obviously, with him. But I would say overall, like there's just some genetic people that are on that end of the scale. It's not a matter of lack of work ethic. It's not a lack of, good plan on the diet, the cardio, the training, the drugs, all that stuff. Some people just genetically hold more body fat or they resist every step of the way. Now, the other thing I was going to say is, because we talk about like on the pro stage or even at the top amateur level, how we're like, man, some of these guys aren't coming in condition. And the thing is, I don't think that's it. I think that so many physiques now rely on exogenous huge doses of growth hormone earlier on in their careers. Well, what does growth hormone do? It's going to lay down collagen synthesis, which is going to impact the skin, right? It's going to put a little extra layer of thickness into the skin, which is going to it's not going to allow you to see the detail that maybe some of the guys in the past who didn't incorporate growth hormone until later stages of their career showed. And I'll give you an example. I think if you look at Jay Cutler in 1998, 99, when he was just separated, he had detail all over his body, versus like when he actually started winning the Mr. Olympia, he was markedly a lot bigger, but he also lacked that like hard detail separation, all those little lines that you were seeing back in that 98 year. So and to me personally, I prefer the earlier look, the 98 look over the newer look. But I do think, at the end of the day, it is a bodybuilding show, and the judges keep rewarding, bigger, rounder, fuller physiques. So, if they're in shape enough, I don't think anything's going to change.
Now, kind of, I guess, another question off of that, in terms of kind of like getting into quote unquote conditioning, I hear a lot of people talk about like doing like, an hour of cardio, 90 minutes of cardio, 2 hours of cardio to kind of get into that conditioning, suffering and all that. But I also hear some more, I would say, elite coaches talking about how more isn't better. And, just there, I just feel like there's levels to this whole coaching thing. And I think there's like an old school way of like, just pull back more calories, more cardio, hit the weights harder. But then I'm listening to some of these elite coaches that have been in the game for years, and they seem there really seems to be a science, kind of like what you're talking about, like really digging into this individual's makeup and what did the coaches do with them in the past, and really going kind of that next level in terms of this individual, get them where they need to be, their best package on stage. So is more better when it comes to all things in terms of bodybuilding or not?
Well, okay. So first, let's talk about this as an adjunct to your question. What is going to bring what is going to be that athlete's best look on stage? Is that ultra crisp condition at the expense of fullness going to bring them a better look, or do we kind of bring them in maybe not as conditioned as we could? We've kind of saved their adrenals a little bit. They're able to fill out much easier. They're able to hold that fullness onto the stage. Is that going to yield a better look? And that's got to be, the coach's eye. That's got to be based off progress pictures, past contests, finding out what they did with previous coaches, or maybe what they did themselves with them in a previous contest prep. So that's just where the experience comes in. But, to get back to the first part of your question, and honestly, I think this is just the nature of any industry, right? We're always trying to figure out how to do things better, more efficiently, get better results for the client, get better results for the customer. I don't think it's a bad idea to try some of the tactics of, okay, maybe less is more in this situation. I don't think that's horrible. But I will say this, that I don't like to see this movement, which I don't see it so much these days, but I did 5-6 years ago, where coaches were posting stuff like, is your coach having you do an hour of cardio a day and eating 50 grams of carbs? Like, they don't know what they're doing. And it's like, no, that's nonsense. Okay. Because there are absolutely some physiques, and I can back it up with 25 other great coaches that many have been on this podcast that would agree with me, that say, no, sometimes you just got to do the work. And, as someone that, I work with John Meadows, right? I start out doing my own preps, but then at some point I turn it over to John, or I would. And I'd be lying if I said that I wasn't doing 2 hours of cardio for a lot of preps. And if I wasn't eating literally, zero carbs and zero fats for a lot of preps. So you're telling me that John was just taking the lazy way out and just trying to tell me, oh, just work harder? Absolutely not. We talked on the phone every single day. So this is one of the greatest minds that our sports ever produced, pushing me that hard. And you know what I mean? I just think that at some point we do kind of have to say, okay, we've tried to do the easier, well, maybe not easier, more efficient way, and maybe it's not working. So we just got to resort to what we can do, which is hard work. And I think hard work's going to, it's going to bear the results at the end.
Yeah. Okay. Excellent, man. Okay. So somebody that you helped turn pro, Nate Spear, how did you guys, cause he won, he got his pro card in December. and then he competed. I think in the Boston Pro. What was that, in like March or something?
Yeah, 12 weeks later to the day.
Okay, so talk about that, because I know that was a big show for Nate. Obviously, being his pro debut, obviously being kind of in his home region, home area. Talk about how you guys felt that went, and then I heard that he's going to be doing the New York Pro in 2023, and if that's so, can you confirm that and just talk about how things are going with Nate?
Yeah. All right, so let's go back to the nationals prep, right? Yeah, everything went smooth. Obviously he had to work hard. He always works hard. That's never an issue. You tell him to do something, it's going to happen. So that was great. So then the tricky part is when you have that 12 weeks, right, between a show and another show. And we've already done this. Me and him have already done this 2 times between North Americans and nationals in the previous years. We just decided to skip North Americans in 2021 and just focus on nationals. So we didn't have to do it that time. But we had good experience on what to do with compounds, what to do with cardio, what to do with food, how to treat his body, how to give him rest and everything. Do you want like details on that, or?
Yeah, I mean, whatever you want to share, go for it. Yeah, I think people love details.
Yeah. Okay. So, in my opinion, when someone, and keep in mind, I wouldn't tell everybody to do this. Nate's got, a shit ton of muscle. He's mentally as strong as anybody in the sport can be. Okay. And like I said, we'd already done this twice, but what you do is, in my opinion, you're going to pull the hardeners out. You're going to pull the Masteron. You're going to pull the Tren. You're going to pull the Winstrol. You're going to pull all the orals. You're going to pull the clenbuterol if you're using any. And you're going to rely just on testosterone and maybe some primobolan for usually the first 6 weeks of that. Now, I'm not saying this is a health phase, but it's a healthier phase than running the compound straight through. Okay. And when we do that, oftentimes you see people kind of come back to life a little bit. They feel better. They're sleeping better. You combine that with a little bit of an influx of food, some calories, some carbs, and pulling the cardio back or out completely. And it's almost like a mini growth spurt with much less drugs. And then, somewhere around that 5-6 weeks out point, since they're already like 95% in shape, because you don't let them get out of shape, you really just got to tinker and kind of titrate the drugs back in. And honestly, you can use a lot less of the hardeners than you did going into that first show. And so that's what we did. And in terms of the Boston Pro, I don't think we could have brought him in looking better, honestly. And I say that about a lot of our shows because I feel like at that point in time, I don't think, maybe someone else could have brought him in better, but I just feel like with our relationship and how we've brought him in each successive show, there's only like one show back in 2018 that I was like, we didn't do so great on that one. But in terms of this one, yeah, I felt like the plan worked really well. I think he was definitely in condition. He was pushing some guys that weren't in as good condition as him, that are just a little bit more known, have slightly better quote unquote shape. Maybe, yeah, they're just a little bit more marketable, I guess, in terms of the IFBB, NPC, that kind of thing. But, when you have a lot of people, other coaches that you respect that are sending you a message after seeing the stage pictures being like, holy shit, dude, he should have beat this guy. He should have beat that guy. That just makes you feel as good as if you had just been on stage yourself, So I will say as a coach, that was really rewarding. But yeah, so then we had, we shut him down and had a nice little off season until we got him ready for a guest posing, which we had about a month and a half ago. And, I don't know if you saw any of the videos or pictures of that, but he looked
Briefly.
We had him looking at like we could have had him ready for a show in like maybe 4.5 weeks if we really wanted to. And this is off running like very minimal stuff too. So he's had a very successful off season, and now we're back into full grow mode. Well, we're cruising right now, but we're going to be back into full grow mode, and then we're going to put him into the New York Pro next year. Probably New York Pro, I think Puerto Rico, and maybe the Cal Pro. We originally wanted to do the Indy, but you probably saw that he canceled that show.
Yeah, I did see that, and that's really unfortunate because I think that show was a great stepping stone for a lot of the young up and coming bodybuilders, right? I mean, and it, from everything, obviously I'd never been there, but through social media you can gather a lot of info, and a lot of the pros that competed there seemed like they really respected that show. So that is unfortunate. Now, I just had Oh, let's see. What's his name? I'm drawing a blank. Anyways, I want to ask you, Andrew, in terms of let's get into kind of like a topic that we kind of touched on quickly before I hit record, and that's kind of like this. I'll call it the glamorization of coaching, right? So
Mhm.
because of social media, specifically Instagram, we see all the highlight reels of everybody's lives for the most part, including careers like coaching and bodybuilding and whatever it might be, being an entrepreneur, business owner. So what I want to kind of get into a little bit more specifically is the life of a coach. Okay. You were just kind of telling me, I asked you how your morning's going, and you're like, man, like got this going on, got clients, overseas that you have to like change up your schedule stateside with, just to make sure you're ready for them in terms of their competition and stuff like that. So why don't you share with us a little bit about maybe some of the misconceptions about being like a fitness coach, prep coach, bodybuilding coach, kind of the position that you're in.
Yeah, I mean, like, well, because I get asked a lot by people like, hey, how do I become a coach? Or, you know, and you know, it's not something that you just day one, you're like, okay, I'm gonna set up shop and I'm gonna be a coach. Like you got to have a body of work in front of you before you start doing that. And most coaches, they start doing it by helping people locally first, right? They gain a little bit of a reputation. This person tells their friend who lives somewhere else, like, hey, you should hire my coach, etc. And I even tell a lot of people, like, if you really want to do this, I think you need to have several contests of your own under your belt where you prepped yourself. Like you didn't have Joe Blow coaching you and you're just going to repost and copy everything he did and send it to people. I really think there's nothing wrong with learning. There's no other way to do it, to learn from other coaches without hiring another coach, right? But I do think you need to have a body of work before you become a coach. Now, in my case, I was a personal trainer for 15 years, or longer, about 20 years, because I was personal training throughout college and even a little bit in high school. And then all through, the next 15 years or so after I graduated college. And at the same time, I was, helping. Back then we called it helping friends out or helping people out. Like I never charged money from my friends that I was prepping for contests. I just had a personal level of pride of like wanting to bring them into contest shape, right? And teaching them everything that I knew. So, yeah, so it's a matter of building up a body of work so you feel confident to do it. Now, the glamorization of it, at the end of the day, it is still a job. And if you're good at what you do, in my opinion, you're treating it like a job. You have a schedule. Like I've heard of coaches that like they get up and they take naps and then they do a couple emails and I just think that's unorganized in my opinion. For me, it's got to be a set schedule. You have your early check-ins, people that are competing maybe this week or the following weekend or somewhere in the near future. You got to get to them first because they need to know what they need to do for that day or for the next few days much quicker. And then you have your Gen Pop people that you can kind of get back to later on in the afternoon. But I do think having a schedule is of paramount importance. And then speaking of schedule, you got to be ready for your schedule to be kind of rocked. Like I was telling you before, I've been picking up a lot of Asiana clients lately. And, I got a guy last weekend that was competing in South Korea. Well, they're 13 hours ahead of us. So everything I'm telling him, I got to be up in the middle of the night starting, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday night, because the show is on a Sunday. I've got to be up, basically almost 24 hours or waking up, intermittently throughout the night to check his check-ins, go to my computer, see if I want to make any changes, look at the pictures, etc. So, it's a great profession if you are organized, if you are motivated. But at the end of the day, it is a lot of work. And any of the coaches that I know that are very successful that, make a lot of money or, really bring clients in at a high level, they're treating it like a job. They are following a schedule. They are busting ass.
I want to ask you because this is something I think maybe is lacking in kind of people wanting to be a quote unquote prep coach nowadays is actually having a foundation of training people, clients in person for at least, I would say at least a year or two, right? Do you feel like that experience of training people in person for all those years, Andrew, really set you up for success in terms of maybe doing more online stuff now currently?
Yeah, oh, absolutely. I mean, so there's no other way to really explain to someone, let's say we're talking about training exercises. like you might have a particular way or method that you want to have them done. Well, you need to have that in practice from actually showing people, right? Because you can't just like write it down or send a Loom video. You got to kind of have it rehearsed in your head about, how to have proper form on any exercise, like a squat or something like that. So yeah, I absolutely do think that in-person training is a great prerequisite for coaching people. There's very few coaches that are successful, in my opinion, that don't have some background in either several years of competing themselves or personal training other people. Like I can think of one, Cameron Cheek does a great job. I don't think he has any real experience in terms of competing or, personal training people because he's such a young guy, but he's a kid that has completely figured, a lot of this stuff out that's maybe taken the rest of us a little bit longer. And he's bringing out some great clients. So, but I want to say this because he's the exception to the rule. I think most of the really good coaches spent a lot of time in the gyms themselves, personal training people, training themselves before they had the requisites to train people online.
Yeah. In regards to like education, and this is kind of you speaking to somebody that wants to maybe get into to prepping people and coaching, like in terms of like actual knowledgeable education, like where can people go? Because it's so hard. Like we live in the information age. There's so much information. Yes, I know you can go to YouTube and I know you can go to Instagram, but you really don't know what you don't know. And if you go down the wrong path, you can, especially if you're going to be coaching and prepping people, you can really mess people up and mess your career up from the get-go. So how do you get that like knowledge? How do you get that reliable education? Like, does somebody need to go to college? Do they need to have like a mentorship with somebody for an extended period of time? Because I know you work very closely with John Meadows. He was a huge mentor of yours, but you had been competing before him. So talk about that for a minute.
Yeah, I mean, man, it's so hard because I think all of us that are coaching have slightly different stories. It's not like if you want to become a master welder, you go to college, you go to a welding school, you finish the 3-year degree, and then you apprentice with somebody. So it's a very different profession, right? There's no prerequisites of what you have to do, right? In my situation, I did go to college for dietetics and nutrition food science. And do I think that's necessary? No. I know other great coaches have, like Chris Tuttle comes to mind. He's a registered dietitian. I've got some clients that are registered dietitians themselves that still use me. So I don't think college is necessarily the answer, but I will say that I do think the time that I grew up and my time of getting interested in bodybuilding, when the forums were such a major thing. A lot of guys that are listening to this probably have no idea really what I'm talking about, but like Chad Nichols had the Muscle Mayhem forum. Skip Hill had Intense Muscle. Professional Muscle is still a forum, but it's not like it used to be. Like the forums back then, it was like the people that actually knew what they were talking about would speak, and the rest of us would just sit there and take notes. And I'm not even lying. Like I would actually take notes on some of the things I would learn on, in the early 2000s and whatnot. I probably spent 2 hours a day on those forums, at least, if not more. I'd make the rounds from this one to that one to that one and catch up on the topics I wanted to learn on. Now, today we just have too much information. There's YouTube, people have pay sites, people are doing mentorships, people hire coaches for coaching. There's just so many avenues that I feel like it's hard to really, swim through the waters and find out what really works and what doesn't work. And yeah, so I would just say like a lot of the good coaches that are around now, I feel like kind of had a similar experience as I did. They spent a lot of times on the forums, just kind of call it lurking, where you're just watching, learning, reading, and putting it into practice. But I think a great way for someone to do it is to hire a coach, okay, and to do at least one prep with that person, and then to go on their own. And maybe if they have a good relationship with that person, continue checking in with them like periodically with what they are doing. Like maybe they're prepping for their next contest all by themselves, but they just want another set of eyes, or they just want a mentor to kind of, maybe I'd steer this way, or just say, hey, yeah, I think you're doing the right thing. Keep doing it. I think that would be the appropriate thing for someone today. I'm trying to think about like what I would do. Right. And I go back to, when I was in my young 20s, I always tried to reach out to the people that I thought were not only qualified to give me information because they had put on mass amounts of muscle themselves, but they also had an education. And for me, that person was, to start off with, was Dante Trudel of True Nutrition. Back then it was True Protein. I hired Dante back in 2004, 2005. And I was like, I think the last client that he took on before he stopped coaching people. And then obviously following people like Dr. Scott Stevenson, following people like Skip Hill, and then obviously I came across John Meadows and, instantly emailed him and wanted to be associated with this guy because just what he was saying was like ringing, bells in my ears, So yeah, I would say it's like finding good mentors, finding good coaches, using that coach for a prep, and then trying something on your own and seeing how you do. I don't think anybody should be coaching other people until they feel confident that they could prep themselves for a contest.
Right. Great words of wisdom, Andrew. Now, on our last episode, we talked quite in depth about your relationship with John Meadows. And we've already brought him up a couple of times. I do want to ask you because I want to make sure as much as I can when somebody is well connected with John, because I followed him on Instagram. I watched his YouTube channel and really enjoyed his like live episodes on YouTube. And I just want to be able to kind of carry him along with the podcast and keep him in the conversation with people that know him that I have on the podcast. So in terms of John, just like, what do you feel like you really gleaned from him? What are a couple life lessons, coaching lessons that you feel like, man, this is because of John, or this is because I spent so much time with John that I practice this, or I live my life this way?
Just a few. I mean,
I know you could do 20 or 30 or 40 or 50, but
I'm going to go with first one right off the top of my head is, don't ever put this bodybuilding thing higher than it should be in terms of other variables in your life, meaning family, right? Bodybuilding has got to fit in, even if it's so much a part of you, it's got to fit into the rest of your life. And, like I give you an example. I see great guys out there. Like I already mentioned, or like Gary Turner, like he's got a family, he makes bodybuilding work. Jordan Janowitz, he's got a family, he makes bodybuilding work. And John was one of those people too, so I think making sure bodybuilding, while it's still very, very important to you, making sure that you don't lose relationships, making sure that you are not short with people that are really just in your corner there to help you, and kind of carrying on that point, because I see bodybuilders do this, like they ruin their careers or they ruin their, not just relationships, but other things in their lives. Like I know bodybuilders that I've coached that have like gotten fired because they were flipping out on their boss because they're on trend and low carbs and et cetera, So I think to make this whole thing work and to be a successful bodybuilder, you got to find the proper place for it in your life. And I feel like John did a really good job of that, even though most people just think John is just this bodybuilder. He's putting out YouTube, he's making videos, he's running the website, but family was the number one thing for him. Yeah. And then the second thing is never become too dogmatic with any approach. Okay. And obviously I think a lot of coaches will come into this, if they stick with the profession over time, is there's more than one way to skin a cat. And just because you haven't seen something yet doesn't mean that it's not possible. And so it's kind of given me the attitude where, like, if someone asks me a question where it's very unlikely that it's the case, my answer is always like, the odds are that that's probably not the case, but I'm open to learning. So yeah, continue on with that point, or continue on with what you're doing, and let's see, because there's just so many different things that you see happen in this sport, whether it's pushing, pulling back, adding cardio, pulling cardio, whatever it might be.
Okay. Now we're going to kind of switch subjects here. Now, in terms of clients coming to you and hiring you to coach them, to prep them, whether that's lifestyle clients or competition clients, what are some maybe just within the last year or two, what are some like health issues or maybe pitfalls that you are having a lot of clients come to you and they're dealing with this issue, or they fall into this pitfall in terms of bodybuilding and prep? Like, what are some of those major things that again, just within the last year or two, that you're starting to see escalate with clients that are reaching out to you, Andrew?
From a health standpoint, this is actually hiccups. It sounds weird, but post-COVID, whether you had COVID or the vaccination that they're giving out. A lot of clients I have now are having issues with hiccups. And back when my training partner, he had them so bad that he had to be hospitalized. And yeah, like he was in the hospital for like 2 weeks, lost 20 pounds. This is right after a contest too for him. So imagine being like looking the best you ever have in your life to then 2-3 weeks later looking like the worst you ever have in your life. He's right back to where he was now, but he was having the hiccups so bad where he couldn't even breathe, couldn't drink water, etc. But and my theory back then was that, you know, the virus or something was aggravating the vagal nerve and causing that response over and over and over again. And now I find out when I go onto the Google Scholar or PubMed that is the case. But when back then I would tell my clients that were experiencing that, I'm like, hey, mention this to your doctor, see what they think about that. And a lot of them thought I was crazy or thought that the bodybuilding coach was crazy, you know, like, no, it can't be that, you know. But yeah, so that's probably the number one health thing I'm seeing. I'm trying to think of some other stuff. Honestly, it's kind of the same old otherwise, though. Maybe people are a little bit harder to get into shape post-COVID. Some of them are having breathing issues. But beyond that, I don't think there's much major, you know, in that realm. I do think
oh, no, go ahead. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
I was going to say, I do think as a whole, like, and it kind of goes back to like when some coach posts like, oh, if your coach is having you do this or that to get in shape, then they don't know what they're doing. I do think sometimes I get some attitude from clients like, wait, you want me to do cardio every day? Or I need to do a double cardio session? And I'm like, yeah, like, and keep in mind, like, I'm friends with a lot of good top Olympian pro body, like for instance, Jose Raymond, he didn't blink an eye at doing 2 hours of cardio a day. He did an hour of stairs in the morning, an hour of stairs at night. We were just having a conversation about it a month ago at our bodybuilding show. And it's just, so I think sometimes people think like, if you're asking them to do something, like you don't know what you're doing. Like if you're really pushing them, then like, well, why isn't this easier? You know? And I tell everyone this, look, I've never had anyone do anything I've never done, you know? So I think that right there.
Okay. So staying on the topic of bodybuilding and health, what are things that individuals can do? And specifically, we're referring to people that, you know, are enhanced athletes.
Yep.
What can individuals do, Andrew, to just, you know, have maybe some healthier practices, you know, do the whole bodybuilding competition thing in a healthier manner? We know that, you know, it's probably not, you know, you're not going to be ultimately as top level healthy as possible if you're doing the enhanced bodybuilding and competing and all that. But I think there are a lot of things that we can do or steps that can be taken for athletes to do this in a more healthy manner. So what are some things that you've learned? What are some things that you suggest in terms of health and bodybuilding?
Well, first, I'm not going to actually believe that bodybuilders are that much more unhealthy than the average population, because the overwhelming population of bodybuilders using PEDs, they don't drink. They have maybe one dirty meal per week. They're staying on top of cardiovascular. They are checking their blood pressure. They are checking their blood sugar. So from an awareness standpoint, they're definitely more in tune with what they're doing rather than the general, you know, 40-year-old guy who goes to the doctor once every 2 years. The doctor says, hey, you need to lose 5 pounds. The next time you go, hey, you need to lose 10 pounds. You know what I'm saying? So I'm not convinced that, because I just don't think that bodybuilders are seeing the adverse, or I'm going to get beat up over this. I don't think they're dying at the same rates that we think they are, because if you look at the general population, people die at younger ages all the time for various reasons, whether it's fatty acid liver disease, whether it's you know, issues with blood clots, whether it's issues with heart, blood pressure, whatever it might be. So I just think we know about it because it's our little bubble, you know, our little niche in the world. So we're like, oh, so-and-so passed away again. So-and-so passed away and so-and-so. So we just see these numbers stack up, right? So with that being said, I just don't know. We'd have to do like a really big cohort study to see our bodybuilders dying at a faster rate than the average human being that isn't taking their health seriously. Now, with that being said, there's absolutely things we should be doing. You know, starting with checking your blood pressure like once a week, checking your blood sugar regularly. Something as simple as drinking 1.5 gallons of water a day. That right there, there's some research that shows that just drinking more water keeps you healthier. Getting blood work done, and not just getting blood work done, 8 to 10 weeks into a cruise when your number is going to be more normal. Like, I'm a big advocate with people getting their labs done 2 weeks before contests, because I want to know, when is it going to be the worst? And typically when you're in a prep, that's when you're using those compounds compounded, that's when things are going to be the worst. Or doing it at the peak of your off season cycle, that's when your labs are going to be the worst. So don't kid yourself into thinking like, oh, I'm 10 weeks on cruise, my blood pressure is pretty normal, my HDL cholesterol's almost at 40, et cetera, et cetera. Don't think that means that you're healthy. It just means that you're healthier in that snapshot in time. Getting your heart scanned, especially as you get older, as you get closer to 40, I think you should start doing it every year or every other year. And then there's a supplementation side of things. There's plenty of things we can do based off individual issues. We found that certain drugs are actually very healthy for people, like telmisartan if you have high blood pressure. I could go into like each individual issue and talk about every different supplement, but the point being is that, if you have a good coach, your coach should be pointing you towards these supplements or different things, protocols you should be doing, either to fix an issue or to try to stop it from coming about.
Excellent. Who are some current coaches that are actively coaching IFBB pros, NPC athletes that you maybe you don't necessarily look up to them, but you really respect what they're doing, how they're operating their business? Like, who are some other coaches, some of your peers, Andrew, that you just really appreciate them?
Man, there's a list, dude. Like, I could go on for about an hour, but in terms of just constantly putting out top athletes, I got to go with Shane Hewley. Now he's more on the women's side, but man, if you go to a pro qualifier and he doesn't walk away with 5 pro cards, then he's got like a look of like anguish on his face. You know what I mean? And just the sheer number, like every year, I feel like he's got like 20 girls that all look amazing. And then his guys do really well too. I'm thinking of one of his bodybuilders, Bridger, who beat me at the show I did last year, who looked fucking amazing. And then from a business and organizational standpoint, Paul Ravella, Team Pro Physique. I don't know if you know who he is. He just puts out quality, and his organizational skills with his coaches that work underneath him. I think he's got that nailed down perfectly. So from a business standpoint, I think he's the guy. Now, in terms of like work, like bodybuilders, man, I got to give it up to Shelby Starnes. I got to give it up to Chris Tuttle. See, I'm going to feel bad because I'm going to forget somebody out and I'll be like, hey man, I'm sorry I didn't say you. You know what I mean? I'm just thinking of people that I talk to like regularly, like, oh, my buddy Justin Randall is always putting out quality people. Yeah, I feel like this is a horrible question because like I feel like I'm gonna have to make a post later and say, hey, if you watch this episode and I didn't name you, I want to give you props. Like, you know what I mean? There's just so many good coaches out there now, and obviously they're good coaches, and we know about them because of the work they put out over and over and over again. So yeah.
Okay, so I want you to talk about this for a minute because this is something we were kind of talking about earlier before we turned on the mic, in regards to just like what you guys actually put in as coaches, like the hours, and this is something that I think is a great perspective that I want you to expound on, Andrew, is your guys's name, like Andrew Barry, your name, the name of your coaching business, when you put a client or an athlete on stage to compete, your individual name, your business name is going with that client. Like, you as a coach or a coach that's underneath you that's coaching the athlete, like when that athlete's on stage competing, you guys are going with them. And I think this is something that maybe people from the outside don't really understand, is that, like, we see bodybuilding and physique competitions as an individual sport, but it's not. It's really not. It's a team effort. It's a team sport. But I want you to talk about and expand a little bit, Andrew, in regards to just maybe some of the stress level, the pressure that you guys experience as coaches, because your name is attached to this athlete, and what kind of goes into all of that in terms of your the mental side, the physical side, and just like wanting to make sure you are producing the best product, so to speak, right?
Yeah, I mean, I'll put it this way. Like, I feel like that at least my experience with coaching has taken a decent amount away from what I can do as a bodybuilder in terms of, yeah, the stress levels alone, scheduling to, like, for instance, I'll give you an example. I knew we had this podcast at 10:15, right? And I try to get my meal in by 9:30, my second meal in by 9:30. And I still had like 7 people that are competing within the next 2 weeks that I hadn't gotten back to. And I don't like to make those people wait, longer than 2 hours after they send me their check-in in the morning. So of course I pushed my meal back until literally right before we got on the phone here. So my point was saying that is that I think the good coaches will put the people that are paying them first to make sure that they are doing their best job with them, and not just saying, oh, I'll get back to them later. I'll make them wait 6 or 8 hours before I get back to them. So there is always that stress level, for me, like just having that email box, like with tons of emails in it, like I tell Rachel, my fiance, I'm like, it's like the volume is just kind of turned up in my head and all I can hear is I got to get back to my email. And I know other coaches talk about this too. Like you just feel that constant stress, and obviously setting guidelines and rules like, okay, you need to check in by this time, or my business hours for response are this to this. But, not everyone sticks to that, which then just creates more work for you for the next day if you don't get back to them. So then you're you end up answering those emails and following through anyway. But yeah, the expectation to travel to some of these shows for some people, there's that, there's, telling them, you got to pay for it then, there's just that. There's just a lot of, it can be a stressful thing. And then you also got to plan in some time for your own education, right? Because you're also constantly trying to learn, like maybe so-and-so is on a medication that their doctor prescribed them. It's like, okay, I want to make sure I know how that's going to be operating with the rest of the program that we're doing. So you got to set aside 30 minutes to really dive into some research and see if there's any red flags you find on it. So it's just constantly scheduling. But in terms of me, like I try to get up early. I try to be doing emails from like 6 o'clock until 8 o'clock when I bring the wife to work. And then I get back and I'm working from like 8:30 until 3:30 when I go to the gym at 4 o'clock. And then when I get home at night, usually around 6:37, I sneak in probably another half hour for emails or programs and whatnot. And then obviously, like I told you, when you have someone competing overseas, you kind of got to set your alarm and you got to wake up at regular intervals. I think Thursday, Friday, Saturday last week, I was up at, I did check-ins at 10 p.m., 12 a.m., 2 a.m., 4 a.m. And then, the rest of the day, every couple hours just to make sure this kid, was ready for his contest. So, yeah.
I want to talk a little bit about business. So as your training and coaching business grows, I mean, what have you implemented or what have you learned, Andrew, to kind of keep the ball rolling, to kind of keep everything running smooth outside of like, having your own personal schedule and having kind of like all of that set up, but like more of the nuts and bolts of business and growing a coaching business. Like, what are some things that you've learned recently that you've implemented that maybe will help some of the other coaches that are going to be listening to this say, hey, that's a great point, Andrew. I'm going to think about doing that with my coaching business.
Yeah, I think so sometimes I get accused of being like a little quick with answers. Like someone will ask me a question and I'll send back yes. And I think they were expecting me to like go into long detail about it. When you have 30 other people waiting for, and it's just a simple question, because sometimes I think clients are looking for more of a pen pal than exactly a coach. So, but what I do is I explain to people now, like, whereas before I'd be like, why do they think I'm being like, they'd ask me like, are you upset with me? And I'd be like, no, like, why would you think I'm mad at you? I just literally answered your question. So I think explaining to people, look, like you asked a simple question. I'm just going to give you a simple answer. It's not because I don't like you or anything that I'm not espousing into this like paragraph long thing. It's just because I got to move about my day, man. But if you have follow-up question, please answer it, So just keeping that communication as to like, why you're being as quick with your answers, I think helps out. And then secondarily, I started using Loom quite often. I don't know if you know what that software is, but it's free. It's free up to a point, but it's not that expensive. But anyway, so when I get my emails, if I want to give a verbal response or a video response, it takes it makes a link instantly. So you don't have to sit around and wait for it to load, and you don't have to do any attaching. You just literally copy, paste, and now you're just like we're talking here. They can watch that. And I think that helps because then they can see the inflection in my voice that like, hey, I'm not mad, or I'm not being quick with them. I'm being quick with the answer, but I'm quickly wrapping it up. That's a helpful tool, especially when it comes to posing tweaks, because you can have their pictures right in front of you and you can say like, okay, now you see how you didn't rotate your back shoulder around to the camera enough more. That's what you got to work on. Put your feet here, etc. That kind of thing. So I think Loom is a good tool. Yeah. What was the original question again?
Just some things that you've learned in terms of implementing within the business of coaching that's maybe helped you keep things running smooth or growing your coaching business.
Gotcha. Okay. So then the other part of that is, and honestly, you really can't do this until you have the amount of business that you want. But when you are at that point where you have the business that you want, raise your rates. That's one thing that, as the people that love you are going to stick with you. You might price some people out, but that's okay. But then the other thing is not being afraid to say no to somebody if you don't think that you are going to work well together. Early on, 2015, 14, I was taking everybody that wanted to come my way. I was even dealing with people that, wanted to have a coach, but followed the plan at 60%, but they kept on paying. So I'm like, cool, keep it going. At this point, it's a business builder and it's helping my bottom line. Now I'm not afraid to just say, honestly, I don't think you have the work ethic that you need yet, or I don't think I can help you based off of this issue or whatever it is. And if possible, I can refer them to somebody else that maybe is in the same point I was in, 8-10 years ago, or might be more keen on a certain issue,
Yeah. Do you have any coaches like underneath you, or is it just you right now?
It's just me. I've been getting asked for years if I would do something like this, either mentor or, incorporate into my business other coaches. And this is something I actually do want to talk about to some of the other coaches that I've mentioned previously that do have a system like this. But I do have in the works right now. We're going to actually start Rachel Obers, my fiance. She's going to start coaching under me. And this is actually a really good point, because here's why I think she'd be a great coach. We worked out together from when she started thinking like, hey, that bikini looks cool. She'd go with me to competitions. She'd be like, do you think I'd look good next to that girl? And my answer was always like, you got to get up there and find out. Right. So she started training with me, training really hard, for like good 5 years before she ever got on stage in 2017. And she won her first class, and then she won her next class. And then we went and did a national show and she got 4th place. And then she went and did another national show and she won her pro card. So my point of saying that is that she did the 5 hard years of understudy, training, finding out about nutrition, learning about it before she even got on stage, and then incorporated 4 preps, got on stage. Since then, she's competed in 17 pro shows, made 4 first call outs in the bikini division. All right. So she's had, 1 year as an amateur, and then, almost 6 years as a professional now. I can't think of anyone better that from the experience level to get ready to walk into coaching. So that, it doesn't work out like that for everybody, but she's had me coaching her over and over again. She's learned things, and she basically coaches herself now in the off season and most of her preps. Really, we do things together. So I do think that is a good tool. Is you got to go through you can't discount prepping and doing things yourself before you can guide others on. So yeah, so she's going to be joining on very soon.
Awesome. And excuse me, will she just be working mostly with female athletes, or will she be kind of be doing both like you do?
Well, that's a good question. I think we're going to start with females, but I'm going to tell you this, and my friends that are watching this that go to shows with us together, she calls the first call outs before the judges even call the first call outs. As she sees, and we're talking at top shows, like the national level shows, when we're sitting there watching, she'll be like 16, 18, 24, like she'll call them out and she'll be like, no, 23 is going to beat 26. And I don't know about, she's able to call this stuff out very easily. So I do think she's going to be able to work with Gen Pop guys initially. she knows, I'm not going to say she knows everything about drugs, but she has been around enough bodybuilders to understand drugs, doses, what they do, side effects, supplements to incorporate, etc. So, but I think I'm going to have her start with females first.
Okay, cool. Okay, we're going to start wrapping up here, Andrew. I know you got a lot going on. In terms of the bodybuilding community as a whole, what's something that you would like to see change? And that can be any way you want to take that question. You take it how you want it.
Something that I want to see change, man. Let me come back to that one. Give me the next one.
Well, let's see here. So, why don't you? I want to ask you about Derek Lundsford. What's your take on him in terms of where you think he's going to place at this year's Mr. Olympia? He's got the invite. He's coming off a 212 championship win. What do you think he's going to place in the Open at the Mr. Olympia this year?
Man, that's hard because
now you can't tell me you want to come back to that one because I don't have another one after that.
No, I don't. So I saw Derek about 5 weeks ago in Tampa. And then I also saw him guest posing in Pittsburgh on stage. When I say that he looked every bit as big as impressive as Nick, he was the best bodybuilder on stage that day in that condition. So you got to look at last year's Olympia, right? You got Rami, you got Brandon, you got Hunter, you got Nick, who am I forgetting? William.
Hottie.
Oh, Hottie. So where was William sixth?
I believe so, yes.
Okay. So you got to look at those names, right? So based off what we're seeing, Rami, they posted that picture of 330 pounds and he already had abs and lines and separation everywhere. He might be the first Mr. Olympia to actually tip the scales over 300 pounds, consider if he wins again. So I don't think anyone's touching him. So who would Derek pick off out of those next four, you know? Now, when Brandon was on stage in Pittsburgh, he was obviously off the gear. He was in a health cycle. So you can't really gauge, he's not going to be the same bodybuilder he was. He's an old enough guy. He knows his system. He knows when he needs downtime, when he needs to push. I find it hard that he'd get pushed out of the top five. So then you look at, those next guys, Hottie, Nick, and Hunter. Who could he pick off there? Structurally, he's better than all three of them. And they figured out how to get him in condition. And man, I have to believe his best look is somewhere in the 230s. Oh, it's going to be so hard. He could be as high as third place. I'll leave it at that. He could be as high as third, as low as sixth. Okay.
I think, the thing that obviously we know that Hunter has the structure, but have we ever seen Hunter come in, what they like to say, peeled? And I don't think we have yet, have we?
Well, so here's the thing. A lot of people were saying from last year's Olympia pictures that he wasn't as conditioned as the other guys. Now, I was sitting like 7 or 8 rows back. Hunter was every bit as conditioned as those other guys. I was right there with them, Now, I should say, was he as conditioned as Hottie? No, Hottie was another level of conditioning at that show. But in the mix with the other guys, yeah, he was right there. And I wonder if it's a situation, if he pushed it even harder, would he lose his pop? And would that relegate him to like 7th, 8th or something like that? I don't know because, I just don't know. It's hard to say. It's
going to be fun. It's going to be an awesome Olympia though. Don't you think, Andrew?
Oh, yeah, it absolutely is. I think, so I'm on the Blood, Sweat and Gear podcast, and I think Scott is trying to get press passes for us to go out there. We're going to do a live episode but then also be able to sit like right up there, which is pretty cool. Yeah. One more thing about Nick though. Nick is like bigger than ever. And I don't love his structure. I don't think, obviously, out of all those guys, he doesn't have the best bodybuilding structure. He's got the most mass per frame. And he comes in condition, and his posing is out of this world in terms of just that stoic, he can go 4, 5, 6 rounds if he needed to. If he made improvements, I don't know where. I don't know where he can fit it. And if his waistline stays in, we might see him move up to second and maybe push Rami for that number 1 spot. So, I put like 6 horses in that race to do well. and it's like for 3 positions, you know what I mean? It's like I gave myself an out at every single avenue there, but I just think that's how exciting it is at this level now, because there's no Ronnie Coleman, there's no Phil Heath coming off like, you know, his 3rd win, going for a 4th. There's none of that. It's you know, Rami going for another one, but it's not a done deal, you know.
For sure. Yeah, I'm so excited, man, because you know, you throw Derek in there and it's like, I mean, he's got the structure, he can get in that conditioning. He's got, I mean, the best coach probably ever in terms of, you know, Olympia wins and all kinds of categories. I mean, you know, one thing that talking about, obviously you being a coach and talking a lot about coaching today, you know, the one thing with Nick that concerns me personally, and I'm obviously a nobody, I'm just a fan, but I didn't like when him and Matt, whatever it was, there's rumors out there, only people within the inner circle really know what happened. Otherwise it's just gossip and it's hearsay. But, you know, I just didn't like to see that relationship, that partnership end, because it seemed like last year, I mean, Matt had Nick figured out, Nick had Matt figured out. It was just a well-oiled machine. And you and speak on this, and then we'll wrap it up. I mean, I feel like that could be a wild card in terms of a hindrance to Nick. I know it seems like this other guy, which, you know, I don't really know a whole lot about him, but it seems like he's legit. Otherwise, Nick wouldn't have hired him.
Well, let me tell you. Hold on.
Go for it. Go. Yeah.
Well, let me.
Yeah.
So, sources close to them, told me that he has now fired Dom.
Oh, okay.
Which kind of scares me a little bit too. So I wasn't going to mention it, but I will. This is what I've heard, that they've parted ways, which is kind of hard to do, or kind of odd considering how close you are to the Olympia. Even if you don't completely love or buy into somebody's system, I think it's hard to make a switch and come in at your best, you know, with only 10 weeks or 15 weeks or whatever it is to go, 12 weeks or whatever. So there's that. So I don't want to say anything ill about Nick, because I think he's a nice guy. He's a great young kid. He's got the whole future ahead of him. So I'm not like being overly critical of Nick, because he's by far a million times better bodybuilder than I could ever hope to be. But I agree with you that relationship that seemed that they had, which seemed to be so real. And I can only attribute it to like the same kind of relationship I have with Nate Spear. You know what I mean? Like, we're in each other's corner. We know what the other person's thinking. We can give good, true, honest assessment and bring the best package. I feel like they really had that. Who knows? Maybe things will change and they'll get back together. But I will say this: Dom is also a really good coach that he had. He rarely misses peaks with people.
Yeah. So that just kind of, I guess, proves kind of the direction I wanted to go with that, is like just the importance of having that coach that's for you, that you guys are connected, you've been through preps together. So that's perfect. Okay, I've got to ask you, I'm going to come back to it. Anything that you would like to see change in the bodybuilding community?
Yeah, I thought about it. Well, this is more within the competitive side of the sport. I would like to see the classic weights either dissolved or increased a fairly good amount, because I think you're limiting physiques that could do really well in classic just because of a scale number. Like, when we say classic, back in the day, we're like, oh, Arnold's got a classic look, or so-and-so's got a it wasn't like his height for his weight. It was, he just has a classic look for his physique. And I think maybe it's kind of, it's boxing some athletes out. Like, for instance, last weekend, Peter Molnaire, he missed weight for classic. Now, I think he looks better as a 212 bodybuilder. He ended up having to do the 212s at the Arnold UK versus the goal, which was going to be to do the classic. Now, I just think I don't like the idea of having to make weight for a classic look, because it might it ruins my classic look. I'll put it that way. Like, for me to have to get down to 240, I lose all my pop. I'm not one of these genetically blessed guys that can stay flat and still have that great look like someone like Keon or whatnot. I need to be somewhere in like the 248 to 252 kind of range to really bring that full pop that I feel like, you know, accentuates a classic look. So that's more of a personal thing to help me out. So yeah.
Are we going to see you back on stage at some point, Andrew? Or are you all done competing?
I don't know.
Okay.
Right now, I'm just trying to be healthy. You know, I got a messed up shoulder. I've got some other issues. I've got a neck issue as well that's affecting a lat. But right now the plan is to, we just bought a house down in Tampa, right outside Tampa. Hopefully it's not, you know, blown over by now with the storm that's going on.
Yeah.
But But I'm going to be down there training with one of my other clients and good friends, Scott Dennis. He's going to be doing a few classic shows next year. He's men's physique that turned classic a couple years ago. So we're going to try to have really good prep together. He keeps telling me I'm going to prep as if I'm doing the show with him. So we shall see. But yeah, it all depends on if I can stay healthy and if I can manage the workload and everything. So,
well, man, I'm not gonna take up any more of your time. I just want to say thanks, Andrew, for coming on again. I've been kind of thinking about toying with the idea of doing kind of like a coach's corner where I just bring on some specific coaches. We just hit some hot topics. We'll see. I don't know, but I'll have you back on again, man. Before I do a quick outro, any shout outs, any final thoughts, any final words? The platform's yours. I'll do the outro and we'll wrap it up.
Yeah. If you guys like podcasts like this, I'm also a host of a podcast, Blood, Sweat, and Gear on the Think Big Bodybuilding Network with Skip Hill and Scott McNally. You can also find a lot of my work on www.mountaindogdiet.com. This was John Meadows' website. Myself, Chris Edmonds, another close friend of his wife, Mary, and RJ. We keep the site running for everybody. You can reach out to me on Instagram at Barry Swole or through my website at bodyberry.com.
Cool. All right, man. Thank you so much, Andrew.
Thank you very much, man.
Yep, you're welcome. All of you who are tuning in to another episode of Behind the Muscle podcast, I just want to say thank you so very much. If you guys have not done so already, please make sure you hit that subscribe button on YouTube. Also, please take this episode with Andrew, share it on your Instagram stories. Make sure you tag Andrew, tag Behind the Muscle so that we know you listened specifically to this episode and found great value in it, in which I know you did. And then finally, I will leave you all with this. Remember, behind the muscle, there's always a story. We'll catch you guys later.
Thank you.